Welcome to this edition of Spotlight. I'm Tamanna in Imandar. UPI, or the United Payment Interface, started off as an experiment of sorts, with 21 banks on board in 2016. It was the then RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan who launched it in a sense, and the idea then was to push digital payments in a country that is in love with cash. Now, whether you think it was the pandemic or a wider adoption of smartphones, UPI, run by a government organization, the NPCI, has become a giant today in digital payments. Sample this. UPI has crossed $1 trillion worth of transactions in the financial year between 2021 and 2022, and in March saw 5 billion transactions. This week on Spotlight, we look at the story of UPI, how it began and what next for a payment method that is threatening to push several early starters in the mobile wallet space into extinction. But first, let's take a look at this report by my colleague Khushbu Tiwari that will help us understand how UPI became the first choice for so many Indians.
One thing common between this coffee shop and this Pani Puri wala is the QR code, that is the common payment method. Every day, India records over 1 billion transactions on this kind of UPI payments. But what has made UPI so popular in India? Let's dig in the details. It's a payment system that has revolutionized the way Indians transact. UPI, or Unified Payment Interface, puts together all your bank accounts into one app by simply linking it to your phone number. It is easy to use even for those who are not tech savvy, and has been adopted across the country for even small amounts, and it is only 6 years old. The pandemic that saw people afraid of infection spread through handling physical money gave UPI the push it needed to go mainstream. In March 2020, when India entered a nationwide lockdown, the total value transacted on UPI stood at 2.06 lakh crore rupees. This has grown over 4 times to 9.6 lakh crore rupees in March 2022. UPI crossed $1 trillion or over 83 lakh crore worth transactions in FY 2022. In July 2020, NPCI launched UPI AutoPay services, which help customers schedule transactions for mutual funds SIP payments and subscriptions for Netflix and Hotstar. And now this year, UPI for feature phones was announced.
Actually, I started paying online, maybe in the last 2 years only, and I have realized the importance of paying online because, I don't have the tension of carrying the cash with me. Anytime I can do a payment, anywhere I want to go, I can go cashless.
The biggest USP for UPI is that it costs nothing. The next step is a light version that can be used in no or low network areas. UPI has positioned India on the map of digital economy where many other nations are miles apart. It has also helped millions of people inch a little closer to financial planning and investments. But still now it is cash that rules India. This is the only challenge that now UPI faces. Khushbu Tiwari for ET Now.
And to speak more on this journey of UPI, I'm joined today by Venkatesh Hariharan, the India representative of Open Invention Network, Anand Kumar Bajaj, founder and CEO of PayNearby, and Ujjwal Chaudhry, director at RedSeer Consulting, is also with us on this show. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us on Spotlight this week. Mr. Hariharan, let me just begin with a sense of the journey of UPI. When it began, was anyone really projecting or predicting this kind of a phenomenally huge adoption?
No, I think in the early days, I was with iSpirit as Director of FinTech at that point in time, and my role was to help the banks adopt UPI. And there was a lot of pushback, but I think some of the savvier leadership of the banks, they supported it. And if that hadn't happened, UPI would not be where it is today. So we realized that, yes, in terms of the journey that we were thinking of building identity, payments and data as, highly interoperable horizontal layers, payments is a really critical piece. So therefore, we did push it hard. There was a lot of resistance from the banks, but I think some of the bank leadership really understood that this is important. But I think none of us dreamt that UPI would be at the kind of scale that it is today. So the answer is no. We didn't dream that it would be this big. Of course, we always hope that it would be this big, but
Yeah, but it was one of many. It was one of many. The sort of Paytm craze had already begun. Demonetization had pushed digital payments to that extent, and then UPI came along, and frankly has made digital wallets kind of redundant today. But I want to understand what the secret sauce is. And Mr. Bajaj, let me come to you on this. Has it also worked because it's not really a government run entity or business? It has allowed private enterprise to piggyback on the platform and grow. There are so many private companies now using the UPI platform. Anyone can really do that and extend to a wide network. Do you think that's why it's worked?
Certainly, I think the whole idea of massifying it with the approach of fintech to take it to consumers, it is more a consumer, direct to consumer approach that has helped. But not to miss the point that the genesis of UPI, I remember fondly, is when we were working and struggling with USSD. And we were telling NPCI, then in the bank that I used to work at, Yes Bank, as Chief Innovation Officer, we were trying to convince NPCI that if these USSD API equivalent are given on a smartphone, how wonderful they would work. It's a unified payment interface. The whole idea of doing an auth layer on NFS and then firing the debit first leg from the originator bank side. The way the construct evolved was fantastic. Pramod Verma, Nandan Nilekhani, Sanjay Jain, they got together, putting best of the minds in NPCI and the banks collaborating along. A few early adopters from PhonePe and others came forward. They were able to see the design potential, the scale potential. Yeah, certainly because of the direct to consumer, the amount of burn that it warranted was possible, and you would still see small little numbers on various other bank platforms that run on UPI, but major share is commanded by 48% by one, 32% by another, and then rest is significant small.
Yeah.
The drama could be magnificent if the feature phones are allowed in the right manner, and there are broken pieces. We will talk later.
Okay. So clearly the idea that this need not be just run by the government, for the government, and controlled very tightly has helped UPI work. So good example there of creating the technology, creating the platform, and then letting free market sort of take over. Ujjwal, what has been the impact of this in terms of what it has done to other digital payment options? And the figures are out there about how UPI is now dominating very greatly. Is one of the reasons also because relative to others, it's free, right? Your charges are nothing.
Correct. So I think the interesting part of UPI, right? So I think the journey of UPI has been similar to the journey of a typical startup, right? So what they were able to do was they were able to, it came in a certain sort of way. People were experimenting with it. If you look at, in fact, the initial days of some of the apps which were using UPI. So the major use case was that since there was a lot of cashback, a lot of people were just transferring money to each other or transferring money in their own accounts to be able to get a lot of rewards, right? And you could see a lot of those social media posts there where they would put up that I have gotten this reward, right? So there was a lot of those startups, those issues which are very unique to startups that happen, right? So that has been the journey, right? So that was phase one where users were just experimenting with it. They were trying to see whether they want to use it on an ongoing basis, etc. Then I think there was a phase between 2018 to 2019 when it sort of reached that product market fit, and the growth in the next 1 year was 10x. Right. So if you look at October 2018 to 2019, there was a 10x growth in the value, right? And a lot of that was driven by the P2P transactions and people using it for different use cases, right? And the interesting thing which has happened is that from there on, the use cases have continued to increase. If you look at October 19 to October 20, the growth has still been 5x, right? Even in the last 1 year, or October 18 to October 20 to October 21. The growth has still been 2x, right? So that growth has not stopped because, the way, the way UPI has sort of grown to continuously build more use cases, right? Continuously sort of address some of the challenges that merchants are facing, that different users are facing.
No, no.
Let's
So
continue
the
to address
basic,
them.
one of the basic reasons, like I said, is because it's free as opposed to the others. So I want to understand. Let me come to Mr. Hariharan. Then, how is anyone making money on this? Because it's great. It started off as a push for and a promotion for digital payments, not really as a business model. I would say it started off as a policy initiative. Would I be correct in saying that? So now, can it go on and on without a clear sort of business and revenue model? Everyone wants to use UPI. Merchants want to use UPI because, unlike others, they don't have to pay any MDR on it.
So if you look at wallets also, there was no charge on that. I remember using, all these wallets and they were not charging any transaction fees. Now, the thing is, it's up to the policymakers to decide whether to charge transaction fees or not. But I think what many players are looking at is the data and then, leveraging that data for lending and other use cases. So, and that's a model we have seen, which it's kind of almost the foundation of the large internet scale platforms today. So I think it's a policy decision as on the part of RBI, NPCI, whether they want to start charging for it, bring in transaction fees, or keep it free so that the data can be leveraged for other services.
That's an important point because that's the famous saying: if you're not paying for something, it's not for free. You are the product. So is that because we need to look at what's happening with UPI from all aspects. One is, how are any of these companies making money? And let me come back to you, Ujjwal, on this. What about now safety of the entire platform? Do you think now, I would say about 6 years later, are there still questions of safety, or are those out of the window? What about failure rates? As its growth increases, we've seen higher failure rates as well. Can you shed some light on that?
Sorry.
Yes, that's questions for you, Ujjwal.
So yeah, I think this safety, I think the awareness has really improved over the last few years, right? So if you look at a couple of years back, I think there were a lot of scams which are running on UPI, right? So somebody would send you a QR code, and the moment you click on that, right, the money would get debited. So I think the awareness programs that have sort of been started by government, been started by a lot of private players, have really helped. If you look at the number of transactors on UPI today, that has crossed 30 crore annual transacting users. And that number is continuously growing, right? So the safety concerns have definitely come down. People are a lot more aware of what to do, what not to do. There are a lot of changes that have happened in the product that have helped. On the failure as well, again, in terms of how it has sort of evolved, right? So we are continuously seeing better performance. I don't have the exact numbers on the failure rates right now, but if you look at specifically on the merchant transactions where the failures used to be much higher, the ability of these apps to run on much lower bandwidth, with a lot more banks being on the platforms, both safety and failure has become better, right? So there is less failure, and the safety is better because of both product changes as well as higher awareness on the users.
Okay. I want to understand what next now for UPI as it goes from strength to strength. Mr. Bajaj, you spoke a little while earlier about how the next step will be for this to be used fully by feature phone users, and that is something which has been launched fairly recently. The option for feature phone users to use this as well. You have UPI Lite, where for transactions under 200 with low bandwidth or no network also you can transact. Do you think this is the way to increase reach? Because even today, let's be honest, I mean, more and more people have adopted UPI, but it is still restricted to the cities.
Yeah, well said. Actually, the fact that digital payment has become a compulsion in rural beyond fashion, and it needs to be augmented, supported with all the innovations that NPCI is doing, including the triad that NPCI has commandeered on the fraud control or education of customers. But let's understand that lower you go in the strata with feature phones, tougher it becomes to control the fraud and the gullible customer segment that one is working with. The initiative is big and strong. The potential is huge. But let's look at the architecture there again. I have requested NPCI earlier in my engagements to request them that let there be a single national toll-free number rather than each provider trying to promote their own number, wherein a fraudster will sneak it with their own number. And when a user, the gullible user calls in, they would end up taking a lot more details than which is required. If there is a national toll-free number also warranted, because if the viability is at question, if there is no profit, it clearly means that only a MNC can come and play with large money and deploy these solutions. A local fintech will not be able to afford. But look at it from a perspective, madam, that by a single stroke of removal of MDR, there's a huge advantage that India as a nation has gained on the GST collection. So while
Mr. Bajaj, I have no problem with zero MDR. I'm just wondering how anyone's going to make money. Because as a business journalist, that's the first thing you figure, right? You figure out where the money is because that's how it's going to sustain. It's grown by leaps and bounds. Can it continue with this model?
Precisely the concern. Ujjwal just a while ago said that 10x has come down to 5x to 2x growth. There is a plateau that has come and there are certain broken pieces. I don't think just an IVR-based payment is a solution. There are a lot more things to be done, including viability. So where I was deriving the point was that while a single stroke of removal of MDR, the GST has gone up, one must look at adding back to the coffers to allow more innovation to happen rather than leaving it concentrated in the hands of few MNCs with 48% and 32% concentration. Otherwise, you are not facilitating a startup to come and play innovation in this field, waiting for data to gather and then make it viable in wake of a
So
GDP.
what do you suggest? What do you suggest?
Allow bringing in a remuneration, even if it is from the GST collection, because of the visibility, transparency coming in from merchant. Let the government pay back to the UPI platform providers rather than waiting for figuring out their models on how to cross-sell. Because not every next startup which comes up, Tamanna, will stand up with a cross-sell opportunity, will not have a sustainable long-term pocket to wait and watch.
Absolutely. When you're making the point that PhonePe and Google Pay, which are MNC-led, have a lion's share, 48% of UPI, then, you know, where do smaller players or newer players go? But can the government really pay them to exist? I mean, that's taking the whole mission of pushing digital payments perhaps but one step ahead.
Wait and watch for the concentration risk and a sanction coming in from a US to stop doing a payment in India, like what you saw in Russia. All the rest.
Okay, let Venkatesh come in on this. Yes.
I have a point here, which is that, the government may have an intention of, spurring digital payments, and I think that's well and valid. But I think the government cannot kind of, dictate zero MDR and things like that. It's like telling an Udupi restaurant that give idlis free for everybody. So, because the government can set the rules of business, can set the rules of the engagement, can set the rules of the marketplace, but it cannot dictate pricing to private players. And I agree with Anand on the concentration risk. I think if we have, at least some degree of, some reimbursement to the players in the ecosystem, there will be incentive for them to reinvest back in the ecosystem. Otherwise, it will be the people who have the gigantic war chest who are able to play the long game, and the others simply have to be, smaller players in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had a slightly different view and.
Yeah, come in. It's becoming an interesting debate, so do come in.
Yeah, no, so I think, of course, all of the points that are mentioned are valid, right? But look, payments is, a lot of times we just tend to compare payments with other services and other like e-commerce, etc. Right? So payments, I feel, is just a very basic layer, and a zero MDR is, I believe, a great booster, right, for the entire ecosystem to emerge much faster, right? Having said that, on the revenue models, right? So, once you are someone who is sort of using that layer for whatever, for driving the payments use case, there are going to be a lot of models which are going to emerge, right? So, all said and done, we are still very early in the digital payments ecosystem, right? Lending in itself, I think, is still very, very early, and it is going to become much more nuanced, right? A lot of people, from a need perspective, right? A lot of people today still don't get the loans that they should, because the amount of payments data is just not available, or the amount of transactions they are doing is not available. So, this zero MDR and in UPI is just going to enable the entire ecosystem to evolve much faster. Even on wallets, right? So while of course the share of wallets has come down as an overall, right? There are still use cases where wallet is actually much higher than UPI, right? So if you look at tolls, for example, right? Tolls has emerged as a great use case for some of the wallets, right? A lot of merchants are still using the wallets because of the kind of innovation wallet players are able to do or forced to do, right? And hence are able to provide a lot of those solutions which UPI players today are not providing. So I think there is going to be place for a lot of multiple players to exist. There is going to be a lot of innovation which different players are going to drive. And revenue models, I think, while today it might seem like a more difficult thing to happen, I think eventually we are going to see a lot more innovation.
I understand all the innovation, but it still confounds me when you're talking about a huge enterprise with billions of transactions every month, and no one's quite clear how anyone's making money providing this service. So that for me is a bit of a red flag, which eventually will have to sort it out. But let me move on to the bigger picture here. And Venkatesh, let me come back to you on this. Yeah. So UPI has grown phenomenally, no doubt. But there is also no doubt that cash is still king. In fact, the amount of cash being used in the economy has only grown. So is UPI driving a move to digital, or is it eating into the share of other digital players? Because at least half of all UPI transactions are for 200 rupees and less. So is it adding to the pie or eating into the existing pie?
I think for merchants, for shopkeepers and others, it's giving them an alternative option of collecting money. Is it expanding the pie? I think that's very hard to say, because we don't have any data on how many cash transactions were happening. Digital transactions are easy to track, but cash transactions are not. So I think the best we can say is that for merchants, it's giving them an option where they can accept payments, and for consumers, it's giving them a second choice in terms of being able to pay through digital, and it's giving them a very convenient option of payments. So it's very difficult to answer the question that you just asked.
But it is an important question, nevertheless, one which has to be tracked. I'm quite out of time, but Mr. Bajaj, last quick word, because I saw you put your hand up. Yes.
No, to add to the question that you asked, actually, like in FMCG, there is an upgrade from an unbranded soap to a packaged soap to a higher soap. You will observe that the 60,000 crore a month of card payment continues to be maintained. You will observe that 3 lakh crore per month on ATM continues to be maintained. The underlying current is that 58 crore transaction a month on ATM has come down to 23 or 27 crore a month.
So the UPI is a super success story. There is no doubt about it. But it would be gullible to say that it can continue at the same pace without further modifications. It has achieved what it set out to do. Get more and more Indians used to moving away from cash, but perhaps not as strongly enough as yet. This is a space definitely worth watching. Thank you so much for joining us on Spotlight this week.